Welcome to Empire's podcast, The Ottomans. I am Frank, your host, and thank you for stopping by. Are you tired of waiting around for Ottoman episodes? How about switch things up a bit with As the Money Burns, created by Nikki? I couldn't restrain myself from leaving this show a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, and I hope you will subscribe and leave her a review as well. Please allow me to read out my own 5-star review of Nikki's show. I am currently binging As the Money Burns, and I'm currently on episode 29, The Taxman Always Collects. First off, the amount of primary research is astounding, as Nikki, the creator and host, dives deep into her subjects and finds the elusive balance, which seems to evade most history-centric podcasts, I'd like to add, between presenting interesting facts and bringing her all-too-human subjects to life. In history, we often forget it's the little interpersonal details that influence people, such as a young heiress's aching for love, or one man's avarice and greed as he seeks to cheat the taxman. Nikki does an outstanding job of bringing these idiosyncrasies to life by showing through apt application of the historian's craft that all of us are interconnected through finances, family dynamics, societal expectations, and, most importantly, our own individual search for truth and purpose in this life. I am both excited and dreading the finish line of my listening to As the Money Burns. We have a lot to cover in this episode, so let's get right into it. Sultan Mehmed I, Wallachia and Crushing Bedreddin, Episode 16. When we last left off, Sultan Mehmed I was hightailing it from Anatolia to Rumelia. Remember, Rumelia is the European portion of the Ottoman Empire. He was hoping to confront the Ottoman pretender to the throne, Mustafa, and the former governor and now rebel, Cuneyd, and to confront their Christian protector, the powerful warlord Mircea in Wallachia. Turning his back upon Anatolia, Mehmed told himself that with all the hell breaking loose in Rumelia, at least he could count upon his flank in the east being secured. How this calculation would turn out wrong will become apparent later. Switching scenes from Mehmed's camp to the usurper Mustafa, and at this point let's cue cheesy Transformer music, the scene wasn't looking all peachy from his side either. For one thing, Mircea seemed not content to simply allow Mustafa to take the Sultanate, and then go about on his own merry way. The warlord was demanding strips of Ottoman territory, and extra rights for Christians within Rumelia. And all in all, it appeared as though Mircea was having far grander designs than Mustafa was comfortable with. Although his fellow confederate, Cuneyd, did manage to strip away a sizable chunk of military forces in the Nikopol military district, his army boasted mostly Christian and Muslim foot soldiers. These soldiers were poorly armed and had almost no training whatsoever, unlike Mehmed's army, which was thundering up from Anatolia and bursting at the seams with Sipahi horsemen and grim janissaries. Assessing the situation, Mustafa decided the best thing to do was try and make peace with Sultan Mehmed. After all, the empire was kinda big, so why not share it? So he proposed carving up the empire between them. I'm not going into much detail, other than to say that Sultan Mehmed rejected the proposal, probably as soon as the messengers arrived in his camp. What happens next in 1416, I'm ashamed to say, is kind of confusing. In writing this episode, I relied upon the works of Patrick Balfour. You'd know him as Lord Kinross. I had to look that one up. Caroline Finkel and Godfrey Goodwin. From what I can gather, it looks like Mehmed cut a deal with the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, in which Mustafa would be allowed to escape with his life and then become the hostage of the Byzantines once again. Cuneyd, likewise, was allowed to escape into Byzantine custody. However, Balfour says that there was an actual battle, somewhere up near the military district of Nikopol, whereby Mustafa and Cuneyd were defeated by Mehmed's army. At the end of the day, I'm coming down on the side of Godfrey Goodwin. In his book, The Janissaries, he contends that there was no actual battle, but that Mehmed's army stopped just outside of Edrine, and then commenced a flurry of cloak-and-dagger diplomatic moves. A few thousand ducats of gold passed hands. Pretty soon, the rebels were betrayed by close subordinates and handed over to the Byzantines. This, I think, is closer to what actually happened because you get both a small-scale skirmish and the sudden custody of two dangerous men into Byzantine hands, all of which can be verified by the historical record. If we accept the account, however, that Mehmed had managed to capture both Mustafa and Cuneyd alive, I just can't imagine him keeping them alive after the stunt they just pulled. As to Mircea, maybe he talked up a big game, then dipped at the first sign of a serious Ottoman response. Whatever the case, Mircea pulled up camp, left Rumelia, and hid in the vast woods of Wallachia, agreeing to pay the Sultan an annual tribute in return for the Ottomans staying away. So, if anything, Wallachian independence was, officially and for the first time on record, breached with the promise of non-aggression against the Ottomans and an annual tribute. We're going to have a ton more to say about Ottoman and Wallachian relations, wars, and everything else in the future, believe me. Whatever the details, what we can surmise is that by 1416, Wallachia was reduced to tributary status, Mustafa was being held on the island of Lemons under the custody of the Byzantines, and Cuneyd was sent to Constantinople, where he was the prisoner of a monastery. This won't be the last time we hear from these two either. After the death of Mehmed in 1421, both men were released by the Byzantines to reap absolute havoc within the empire. Talk about costly loose ends. Sultan Mehmed didn't have time to bask in his recent, what are we calling this exactly, victories? Because, while directing things from Edrine, bad news trickled in from Anatolia. The trip turned into a gush, then a mad wave of never-ending terrible news. Two powerful beys, nominally under Ottoman control, had risen up in open rebellion, with field armies and popular support. Mehmed seemed to think this may have been unfinished business in the east from his previous campaign, until the name of the one who inspired the rebellion became apparent, Sheikh Bedreddin. Yes, after promising to cover the Sheikh's rebellion for the past 2 episodes, we are finally here. His rebellion stands out in the reign of Mehmed for 2 reasons. First is that it was completely unexpected. Mehmed could expect rebellions from the Carmenids and other unruly beyliks in Anatolia. He could also expect Christian discontent in the Balkan provinces at the behest of foreign powers. But Caroline Finkel tells us that in times of social, economic, and political hardship, the stage is often set for charismatic leaders to take advantage of the chaos, and this Sheikh Bedreddin accomplished in spades. The second reason it stands out is the rebellion echoed throughout Turkish history well up until the mid-20th century. During the rise of fascist dictatorships in the 1930s, many left-leaning Turkish parties sought inspiration from Bedreddin's philosophy of oneness to counter the semi-mystical messages of blood and soil being propagandized out of Nazi Germany. Plus, even with the death of Bedreddin, yes, I know, spoiler alert, in 1420, his ghost would haunt the Ottomans in the form of uprisings for the next 2 centuries, each rebellion aping the philosophy that nobody should own all the land. Peasants should be allowed freedom of movement, freedom to worship and gather in public places, finally morphing into a political expression of will and into the formation of the modern Turkish state we have before us today. Now, onto the man himself who started all this business. Born in 1359 near Edrine, Bedreddin's mother was the daughter of a Byzantine military commander. His father was one of the various guns-for-hire Akinci warriors, that had come in from Anatolia, and whose ancestry counted several high-ranking Seljuk Turkish administrators. The Christian side of his family, mostly Greeks converted to Islam with the arrival of the Ottomans, would serve in various official capacities in the empire. Growing up, Bedreddin was exposed to Christian orthodoxy, Catholicism, and also the various sects and secret mystic groups within Sunni Islam. I believe that growing up, young Bedreddin was what we'd call a whip-smart young man, who asked lots of questions and privately never converted to one particular view or religion 100%. He is noted to have pointed out the contradictions found in Christian texts, but also wasn't shy about turning a critical eye upon his own Islam and the sacred truths it purported to represent. Based on his background, his intellectual curiosity and skepticism, is it no wonder then that he developed somewhat of a syncretic view of religion, believing that both Christianity and Islam had their strengths and weaknesses, yes, but none could honestly claim a monopoly on truth itself. We see Bedreddin develop an internal tension. On the one hand, he needed to make a living in a very Ottoman world, and at the same time, the secret yearning to feed his soul's true desire and passion, the mystical connection between all living things, and the desire to explore this reality. How did he feed his soul, you might ask? Why, by joining the many secret societies and some would call cults springing up within Ottoman Sunni and Persian Shia areas. In his early 20s, it was time to go out and get a big boy job, and to this end he became a Qadi, or military judge for the Ottoman forces. Taking leave from his post, Bedreddin would spend some years traveling about the wider Middle East, going first to Konya and Anatolia, where he would immerse himself in the Proto-Bektashi orders forming up. Then he would head down to Cairo, Egypt. As far as his formation goes, his most notable travels were to Persia. While in Persia, he encountered the mystical order of the Safavids, where he linked up with a group. And guys, I tried and tried, but I couldn't find the order to which he was initiated. Very bad form on my part, I know, and I'm sorry. At any rate, he found a group that emphasized oneness of being. The view of oneness held that the divisions in human society, slave and master, landed property owners versus the dispossessed, rich and poor, male and female, all interfered with humans achieving lasting happiness by creating attachments which blocked perfect union with the supreme being of oneness. This view or belief would be condemned by Ottoman Islamic judicial rulings for the next 4 centuries. And later sultans, especially Suleiman in the 16th century, would face a conveyor belt of fresh graduates of this school, espousing the philosophy of oneness and stirring up no end of trouble. In 1401, Bedreddin left Persia for good and took up his old post of Qadi just in time to join Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt's defeat at Ankara, and to suffer through the ensuing civil wars. 1404, Prince Musa made overtures to Bedreddin to join his administration, and he was granted the position of Qadi Asker, or head of the military judges. This was a pivotal moment in the life of the Sheikh, as he received good old temporal power to realize the true inner belief he secretly held to, and he set about at once divvying up lands to the unpaid and irregular itinerant soldiers who flocked to Musa's camp. These land grants were called Timurs, and at a time when under Bayezid, the sultans were proclaiming that in theory all land belonged to them, Bedreddin was issuing land out, and the grants were going to individual holders themselves, empowering them to become independent of the state. By the time of Mehmed's victory in 1413, the Ottoman state looked on with concern at all these Timurs being issued by Bedreddin. These vast holdings existed independent of local administrative control and extended as far as Izmir in Anatolia, all the way up to Bulgaria and Rumelia. The situation was, of course, unacceptable from the Ottoman standpoint, and Bedreddin was seized, although at this point it should be noted that his reputation as a holy man and his popularity with the people incentivized the Ottomans to handle him with respect and kid gloves, and he was placed under opulent house arrest in Bursa. Meanwhile, the erstwhile property owners weren't so lucky, as they saw their farmland stripped from them and consolidated into gentry holdings by old families loyal to the Ottomans. These dispossessed people, a large contingent of whom were former soldiers, were forced to accept menial jobs that, or wander the empire looking for work, and lacking work, always finding trouble. Things got worse for the newly dispossessed after Mehmed's campaigns into Anatolia in 1416. The conflicts against the Beys brought new malcontents to Bedreddin's banner, and pretty soon an organized resistance to Mehmed formed around Bedreddin, and later that year he traveled to the city of Sinop, situated on the Black Sea, breaking the terms of his house arrest. From Sinop, Bedreddin sailed to Wallachia, which seemed to be playing host to every Ottoman malcontent for the past 10 years. What collectively became known as the Sheikh Bedreddin rebellions took place in 3 areas of the empire. Izmir, located in western Anatolia, and which in episode 15 you might remember was the center of Cuneyd's rebellion. Dobruja was the Ottoman provincial administration in Rumelia, and was a prominent recipient of Bedreddin's land redistribution, now a hotbed of discontent. And, perhaps worse, the major Anatolian beylik of Sarahanids. In Anatolia, the rebellion of the Sarahanids would prove the most stubborn to put down, as Mehmed was forced to commit a sizable contingent of his military forces. Centered in Manisia, near modern-day Ankara, this beylik was one of the former frontier entities, tracking its way back to the original Turkish tribe. In 1390, Bayezid the Thunderbolt overran the beylik and forced it very heavy-handedly, I might add, into vassal status. During these succession battles, the ruling dynasty of the Sarhanids backed this or that Ottoman pretender, but in the long game, ended up on the losing side when Mehmed took the throne. Finally, during Mehmed's excursions into Anatolia, after having won the Sultanate, he formally dissolved Sarhanid as a political entity, making it just another province ruled by a military judge, and displaced the ruling dynasty. It's little wonder, then, that both the common people and the former ruling elite looked to Bedreddin's teachings, not just for his philosophy of coexistence and peace, but as a way to reestablish the old order under new colors. Sultan Mehmed, who was in Bursa at the time the news of the rebellion reached him, decided to turn the military operations over to a very capable and loyal general, the redoubtable Bayezid Pasha. Born in the town of Amasya, a small place in Anatolia, he was the son of an important Ottoman Ghazi warrior who served with Sultan Murad I. When Bayezid Pasha was in his early teens, he was sent to the palace in Edrine to serve as a page. It was there that he first met the young prince and future Sultan Mehmed. The Pasha would follow Mehmed throughout his travels in Europe, and went along for the erratic military campaigns of Sultan Bayezid, serving as Mehmed's chief companion and advisor. During the disastrous Battle of Ankara in 1402, as the forces of Tamerlane swept the battlefield, they were intent on snatching up as many of the Ottoman families they could manage. Mehmed, who was present, evaded capture because Bayezid Pasha, his old friend, came riding in on horseback and picked him up off the battlefield, and the two of them rode off in haste with troops hot on their heels. They evaded capture by hiding out in the hills, taking refuge in villages, and disguising themselves in larger towns. In this manner, the duo leapfrogged their way back into Ottoman territory. When Mehmed became Sultan in 1413, his first act was making his old friend senior vizier, and now the important task of bringing this Bedreddin to heel was placed before him. Without sitting on his thumbs waiting for reinforcements and refusing to pull troops from garrison duty along the Danube, Bayezid Pasha, whom from this point forward for the rest of the show, I'm simply going to refer to him as Pasha, crossed the Dardanelles with a ramshackle force and headed straight for Sarhanid. Along the way, he systematically destroyed every town, village, and farm of all who opposed him or had refused to yield to the Sultan. He had long been a supporter of Sultan Bayezid's more harsher tactics in dealing with the beys of Anatolia, and the Pasha crushed all who stood against him without tact. Finally reaching the province of Sarhanid, his forces entered the troubled region and quickly captured the leaders of the rebellion without much of a fight. The vast majority having fled and dissolved into the countryside when word got around that the Ottomans weren't messing around. He had the rebel leaders march back to Bursa in chains, the heads of the once noble family of Sarhanid forced into the streets of Bursa to be pelted, booed, and assaulted by the common citizen. As Sultan Mehmed's edict announcing their deaths as common criminals was read aloud, they were all herded into the marketplace and publicly hung. Hanging, you see, was a humiliating form of execution for Turkish nobility, and the Sultan and his Pasha wanted everyone to know that these were common criminals. Their relatives, retainers, and anyone remotely associated with the rebellion were stripped of any offices, noble titles and fortunes and lands they possessed, and were left with little more than their lives and driven into the streets. No sooner had Pasha crushed Sarhanid than he turned and in like manner crushed the rebellion in Izmir. Thus, by the year 1418, Pasha had destroyed the rebellion and re-established order in Anatolia. Even though enemy forces were gathering in Dobruja, and threats of Wallachian intervention seemed like something to worry about, the Pasha took his sweet time making sure there were no loose ends to worry about. One of the reasons he wasn't in too much of a rush was that word had reached him that Bedreddin's rebellion in Bulgaria was beginning to fizzle out of its own accord, and that Mircea of Wallachia had expelled Bedreddin from his lands. It appeared as though the arrangement between Wallachia and the Ottomans had been working out to Mircea's favor, and he began to see the Sheikh as a liability at this point. By 1420, Bedreddin found himself alone with only a few thousand supporters in Ottoman Bulgaria. All around him, Ottoman militias were cutting off his access to the main roads, forcing his followers into surrendering or dispersing, until in the fall of that same year, Pasha arrived in Rumelia with a gold prize on the Sheikh's head. What happened next is a bit confusing, but I'm just going to go with there may or may not have been a battle. The Ottomans were loath to record in detail any field engagements against whom they deemed rebels, or Bedreddin fled a wanted man. At any rate, the Sheikh was seized or handed over by betrayal to an advance guard of the Pasha in 1420, just outside of Edrine. Mehmed formally divested the Sheikh of his position of Qadi and ordered him beheaded as a common criminal. By 1420, then, the Ottoman Empire was looking pretty good on the surface. The Anatolian beys had been brought to heel, or so it seemed. In the west, Hungary was about to go into the throes of a succession battle, and Wallachia, or Wallachia depending on how you pronounce it, was confirmed as a tributary of the empire. Internally, the Ottoman administration hummed along, as it purged itself of malcontents and inefficiencies. Mehmed's military reforms were continuing apace, despite the interruption of the rebellions, and the Janissaries were being sharpened into a well-oiled fighting machine, tempered by regular practice drills, forced marches, and strict discipline. Next time, we are going to deal with the last year of Sultan Mehmed's life and reign. I already kind of miss Mehmed. He was a great person to get to know throughout the sources these past couple of episodes, and I hope that you will join me. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider heading on over to Apple Podcast and leaving me a 5-star review. It really helps. Happy holidays, and thank you for listening.